Rugrats. Nickelodeon launched Rugrats in 1991, and it became one of the defining cartoons of the entire decade. The show followed a group of babies, Tommy, Chucky, Phil, Lil, and eventually Angelica, who could talk to each other but not to adults, which meant every episode was built around their misinterpretation of the grown-up world around them. A family vacation became an epic adventure. A trip to the grocery store turned into something terrifying. The genius of the show was that it never talked down to kids while also being genuinely funny to parents watching from the couch.
Animaniacs. Warner Brothers brought Animaniacs to television in 1993, and it operated on 2 levels simultaneously. On the surface, it was a slapstick cartoon about 3 siblings, Yakko, Wacko, and Dot, causing chaos wherever they went. Underneath that, it was packed with cultural references, wordplay, and satirical humor aimed squarely at adults. Kids laughed at the physical comedy. Parents caught the jokes their children missed entirely. It was one of the few cartoons of the era that genuinely worked for everyone in the room, and its theme song remains one of the most recognizable in animation history.
Hey Arnold. Nickelodeon released this in 1996, and it took a quieter, more grounded approach than most cartoons of the era. Arnold lived with his grandparents in a boarding house in a city that felt like a slightly heightened version of a real American urban neighborhood. Each episode focused on a different character from the neighborhood, not always Arnold himself, and explored their problems, their backstories, and their relationships with genuine emotional weight. A bully named Helga had a secret crush on Arnold that she processed through elaborate private fantasies. A classmate named Stinky had dreams that never quite matched his reality. The show trusted its audience to sit with complicated feelings, and kids responded to that trust.
Dexter's Laboratory. Cartoon Network debuted this in 1996 as part of its original programming push, and it quickly became one of the network's most popular shows. The premise centered on Dexter, a boy genius with a massive secret laboratory hidden behind his bookshelf, whose experiments were constantly being ruined by his cheerful and oblivious sister Dee Dee. What made it work was the contrast. Dexter was serious and methodical. Dee Dee was chaotic and carefree, and the collision between those two personalities drove every episode. It also helped launch Cartoon Network as a serious competitor to Nickelodeon and Fox Kids.
Pinky and the Brain. This show began as a segment within Animaniacs before earning its own series in 1995. The premise never changed. 2 laboratory mice, one a genius and one profoundly dim, attempted to take over the world every episode and failed every time. Brain would devise an elaborate plan. Pinky would accidentally undermine it, and they would end up exactly where they started. The repetition was the joke, and it never stopped being funny because the plans themselves were always different, and Brain's frustration always felt fresh. The dynamic between the 2 characters was written with enough affection that you rooted for them, even knowing they would fail. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. The original cartoon had started in the late 1980s, but dominated the early 90s in a way few shows have ever managed. 4 turtles raised in the sewers of New York, trained in martial arts by a rat, fighting crime against an evil ninja clan. The premise was absurd on paper and completely irresistible in practice. The show sold an enormous amount of merchandise, inspired movies, video games, and a live-action stage tour, and turned phrases like cowabunga into part of everyday childhood vocabulary. For many kids in the early 90s, the Turtles were as culturally present as any real celebrity. Doug. Nickelodeon premiered Doug in 1991, alongside Rugrats, and while it was quieter and less chaotic than its counterpart, it resonated deeply with a specific kind of kid. Doug Funny was an ordinary 11-year-old, navigating a new town, a crush on a girl named Patty Mayonnaise, and a best friend named Skeeter. The show dealt with everyday anxieties, fitting in, being embarrassed, worrying about what other people thought,
in a way that felt honest rather than dramatic. Doug also had an active imagination, and episodes would shift between reality and his elaborate fantasies without warning, giving the show a visual creativity that set it apart.
Johnny Bravo. Cartoon Network introduced Johnny Bravo in 1997, and the character was essentially a parody of every muscle-bound, self-obsessed pretty boy that had ever appeared on television. Johnny spent most of each episode convinced that women found him irresistible, being proven wrong in increasingly creative ways, and learning nothing from the experience. The humor was broad, but the self-awareness kept it from feeling mean-spirited. It also had a visual style heavily influenced by 1950s Americana. Slicked hair, classic cars, diners, that gave it a nostalgic texture even when it first aired.